Welcome to CodeSlate. Here is a new series of lessons on Springboot Oauth2. So we will be learning how to use Spring Security Oauth2 to integrate our Spring Boot applications with Oauth or OpenID providers such as Google, GitHub, and other Oauth servers like Okta or Keycloak. So in this lesson, we will see how to use Spring Starter oauth2 resource server to integrate our Spring Boot applications, which is a resource server or API server with Oauth providers like Keycloak. So to understand more, let's look at the sequence diagram. So here is a sequence diagram of what we are going to learn in this lesson. So we have a Keycloak application, Keycloak server, which is a OAuth OpenID provider, and it's an open source identity and access management solution for modern application. Keycloak also provides out-of-box authentication and authorization service, as well as advanced features like user federation, identity brokering, social login. So for us, it's an IAM solution. So this is Keycloak. So we will be developing resource server, which when it is called by an external application with an access token, which is external application, that the client application already authenticates itself with Keycloak, and after authentication, it gets back the access token. So now our application, which is a resource server, will be providing or exposing an API which has to be authenticated with a token. That means any application which calls our resource server should send a right token to access the API. So API request will be sent with an access token. So resource server, as it is integrated with Keycloak, it validates the access token, checks with the Keycloak that if the access token is valid or not. Once Keycloak says, okay, the token is valid, then only the response is sent back to the calling application. So for that, first we need to set up the Keycloak and write the resource server and request the resource server with the access token. So let's start with the Keycloak. So how to set up the Keycloak? So download the Keycloak from here. So I have used the downloaded with Quarkus distribution. I downloaded the Quarkus distribution. Let me start the application. So we can start the application using shkc Keycloak as a dev environment. So I started the Keycloak here. So by default, it starts on 8080 port. So I started here. So let me open. As I pre-created the user, so once you log in, you have to create a realm. Realm is some security domain within a OpenID server. So I created a security domain called Springboot. This is a realm I created, and then I created a new client called demo app. This is what I created, a realm. Under the realm there is a demo app. This is an app. This is a client I will be using. Then for this, I also created a test user. I created a test user. I'm not configured any roles, but I have created the test user. So basically I need to create a realm and then a client and a test user. So when I log in with this test user, and I log in when the client application logs in with the test user, gets the token, and I use that token to access the resource server or API server or a Spring Boot application, whatever we are going to develop. So now my Keycloak is ready. So it is already configured. Let's go back to our Spring Boot application that we will be developing. So as we have already saw that our Spring Boot application is a resource server or API server. So as we have already saw that we will be developing the resource server. We configure the Keycloak. We will be developing the Spring Boot application, which is a resource server. Okay, let's go back to our application. So I have pre-created an application which provides a employee API. So when a client application calls the employee / with an ID, it returns the employee. So now I want this application to be integrated with Keycloak. First thing we need to do is we need to use the proper dependency. So the dependency is here is Oauth2 resource server. So I'll add the dependency. So this is a dependency which brings the auto configuration and downloads the certificates from the Keycloak. So I added the dependency. Now I need to configure the application. So I need to configure a Spring Security Oauth2 and then JWT issuer. So this is a Oauth2 configuration I need to do for Keycloak. So here JWT issuer URL is nothing but the Keycloak URL. See here, this is a realm I created in the Keycloak Spring Boot, and I need to provide the issuer URL. So this is an auto discovery URI from the Keycloak. So when I start the Spring Boot application, because of this dependency, resource server dependency, the Spring Boot tries to discover the URLs from the Keycloak. So we need to just configure the issuer URI. So once the issuer URI is configured, the Spring Boot auto configures, auto discovers the Keycloak URLs and auto configures the Spring Boot. So now I need to configure the Webcam security. So for security configuration, basically I need to say that the request has to be authenticated and the token within the request has to be validated against the certificates. The certificates will come from the Keycloak. So I said that so all the requests has to be authenticated, and then it is a resource server. Our Spring Boot application is a resource server, and JWT token which is sent in a request has to be validated. So this is done with this security config for the Spring Boot application. Now I need to update this controller. This is an API which our Spring Boot application will be exposing for the other clients. So I also can inject the JWT principal, which can be used to know who has logged into or what user has been used to log into the Keycloak, and then we can get the authentication information from this principal. So I'll just print the user principal name which has logged into the Keycloak. So now my application is ready. Recap. So we have included dependency for a resource server dependency. This will bring the auto configurations to the Spring Boot application, and then I configure the issuer URL for the Keycloak, and then finally I configure the Spring Security, so that I'm saying to my Spring Security that it has to be authenticated using the JWT token. Now Spring Boot application is ready. Let me start the application. This if you see I'm starting the application at 8081 because 8080 is already used by the Keycloak. So I'm starting at 8081. My application has been started, and yeah. So now how to test my application. So this is an resource server. So the API server, I need to test my application. So we'll be using Postman. Before that, I want to go back to the sequence diagram. So what we have done is to configure the Keycloak and develop a new resource server, that is our Spring Boot application, which provides an API, and this API can be accessed by any clients only if had a valid token. So we have developed this one and started this one. So now I need to, whenever I want to call the API on the resource server, I need to provide the access token. So to get an access token, I need to authenticate with the Keycloak that I am the user, so and so user, and this is my password. Please authenticate and give back the token. So once I get the token, I need to send the token in the header. Then only I can call the API of the resource server. Without access token, I cannot call the resource server. So now I'll be, first step I'll be 1 and 2, I'll get the token, and 3 to 7, I will call the resource server with the token. So let's see how we can do that in the Postman. So coming back to the Postman, so the 1 and 2 steps will be, that is getting that token will be performed by get token, and then 3 to 7, whatever I was showing, 3 to 7, this part is done by in the get employee. So to get the token, we need to pass some of the information to the Keycloak. The information is what client ID you are authenticating, and what is the username, and what is the password for that user. So and the grant type. So the grant type, there are different grant types which can be used to communicate with the Keycloak. One of the grant type is password, where the username password is provided in the same request. So this is a endpoint for getting the token from the Keycloak. So I have supplied all this information. Now I'll just request the Keycloak to get the token. So I'm getting the token, I'm getting the access token, refresh token. So now we are interested only in the access token. So we will be using this access token to perform these steps. That is, we use the access token and send that access token in the request, and get, once the token is valid, then only the resource server will send back the response. So that part is get employee. So before that, I want to show what is the request here. So the request will be the get token with this grant type as password, and then username, password, and client ID. This information is needed, and then Keycloak validates this information. Once username, password is valid, all the client ID is valid, then only it will send back the token to the so basically we are simulating the client app here. So once client app gets the token, it uses this token to call the get employee. So now to simulate that, I'm storing that in the token, which is part of environment of the Postman. So here it is. So this is I created an environment with token, and then token is stored here. So if you see go back to my get token, and there is this is what I have written the scripts to pass the response body. To pass the response body of the get token, this whole response body is parsed, and then extract the token and store it in the token. Extract the access token and store it in the token. That token I will be using the get employee. So now so I'm using the token and call this. This is my resource server or Spring Boot application API, which is exposed as employee/101. So this is a URL of the API. So I'll just call the API with the token. So I'll get back the response because my token is valid. So we'll see the request, curl request. The curl request is here. If you see, it's a URL with header as bearer authentication colon bearer. This is a token which we got back in the previous request that is sent to the header. And then once this header is valid, that this token is verified against the certificates that Keycloak provided, then only my application server or my resource server, that is Springboot application, send back the response. If the token is not valid, then it will straight away rejects. So we can also see that. Just I'll remove the token. So I have no token now. I'll send a request to the my resource server or API server without a token. So when I send without a token, it says it's not authorized because there is no token, so it is not authorized. So I can't access my API without a valid token. Springboot. So let's see what is happening in the background. So I want to run in the application in the debug mode so that we'll see what is happening in the background. So I just enabled the logging with the REST template, how it communicates, so that we can see how it communicates with the Keycloak. So let me restart my application. So I restart the application, and then let's start with the first. I'll get the token. I got the token. When I trigger API call, so the Springboot application recognize, Spring Security recognize it has to be authenticated with the token. So let's see what happens. So I'm sending the request to the employee, get employee with the token, and then we'll see what is happening in the background. So first thing, it communicates with the Keycloak. First thing, it communicates with the Keycloak to get the well-known OpenID configuration. That means it discovers the URLs of the Keycloak. So this is the endpoint to discover the URLs. So let me show what will be discovered here. So it discovers everything of the what are the APIs, what are the URLs, what are the security configurations from the Keycloak. So once it discovered, our Springboot application discovers this, it will be using the certificates. So if you see here, next step is it gets the certificates from the so why do we need certificates? It needs certificates when a token comes, it comes with the issuer certificates. So the issuer certificate, it has to verify. So to verify the it needs a public key. So to verify if the token is proper or not, it uses the certificates to verify. So if you see, we can also see the what is there in this token. So if you go back, I'll just copy the token. I'll just open JWT. So we can see here what is there in this token. No, maybe it looks like I have not copied properly. I'm copying the token. Okay, so if you see the token, so the token contains important information like the user, which user has been logged in to generate this token from the Keycloak, that is test user, and also the signature. So this is a signature which is verified with the certificate, so that the signature, you can see this is a signature that has to be verified for this token. So this part has to be verified. So that's what it needs, the certificates and other information, and the scopes, roles, all information will be in the token. This is the access token that we got. So this is how we can integrate a simple Spring Boot application with OpenID provider like it's maybe anything. So here we saw the Keycloak. It can be Okta or Google or GitHub, all OpenID providers we can integrate. So this is a simple integration where we used um, a library, Oauth2 library, that is resource server library. So we also call this as this Springboot application as a resource server or API server or bearer client. They call differently. Bearer client because so the authentication is only through token. So yeah, that's it from this lesson. See you in the next lesson.